Steve from the garden. In this video, I'm going to go over my garden plan for the 22 growing season and my thought process that I put into designing that garden. One of the first things we need to do as gardeners when we think about our garden plan is, what do we want to get out of the garden this year? For some people that might just be, they just want to eat fresh out of the garden. For others, it might be preserving their harvest so that they can continue eating homegrown food through, say, the fall and the winter. Another thing to consider is, what did well last year, or what didn't do well last year? If something didn't do well, do we have an idea why it didn't do well? And what changes do we need to make to give it a better shot at success this year? For me personally, I think about, what do I want to can this year, which is part of that preserving aspect. You'll see in my garden plan, I have like a little section where I have a listing of what do I want to can. How many jars of tomatoes or how many jars of corn do I want to put aside. The shift I made in my garden plan last year was to dedicate more space to those vegetables that I could preserve or carry into storage for the fall and winter. I'm going to continue that theme this year, but also hone in on planting the right amount of each vegetable. And an example of that would be planting fewer tomatoes and more potatoes. In the early part of the season, you have your tomato plants going and you're happy to get every little harvest you can get. But toward the end of the season, you end up with a vast surplus and you're trying to scramble to give it away. When planning your garden out, you want to monitor your garden for how much sunlight it gets. And this will vary as the season goes on, and it's especially important for new gardeners. Making sure that the amount of sunlight that a particular vegetable gets is suitable for what you're trying to grow. Another thing I think about is those things I want to succession plant. Now that could be where I pull one harvest out and then something else goes in that spot. But it also is a matter of staggering those things I plant so that they don't all mature at once and I end up with a gluttony of things and then nothing after that. Something that comes up, at least in the bigger gardens or in the commercial gardens in particular, is the idea of crop rotation. Now, crop rotation isn't quite so critical for the home gardener, but it is in your own best interest to not plant the exact same thing in the same spot every year. If you are going to repeat plantings in the same spot, maybe you want to try to get a cover crop in between those plantings so that the soil has a chance to regenerate and help break any pest cycle that might be in the soil. This is a high-level overview of the garden. I like to use Excel for making the garden plan because it allows me to map out every square foot of the garden, and I can quickly and easily move things around as I come up with ideas. In this section I got my two honor beds. Both of these beds are 5 feet by 10 feet. Now in this section I got asparagus and strawberries, which are both perennials, and I actually have thyme and oregano, which are also perennials. I'm going to be doing some staggered planting of basil. Now I'm staggering it because the basil will start to flower, so by spacing it out I'll be able to keep collecting leaves without having to worry about the flowers so much. In this area I got my squash and watermelon, and I'm also planting red sage in this area. The red sage is to bring in pollinators to help make sure that the squash and the watermelons get pollinated. In this section I'm going to be doing succession planting of green beans. So about every 2 weeks I'll be seeding green beans throughout the growing season so they have a continuous supply. This is the pepper bed I mentioned. So I got my Alma paprika and then my new bulldog paprika. Cubanelle, I do have some celery I'm going to be planting this year, and then Santa Fe peppers. Now if you haven't watched my new seed varieties for this year, I'll leave a link up here for that. Now this is one of my in-ground beds. This bed is 28 feet long by 5 feet wide. So I'm still kind of playing around with this bed, but I know I'm going to be doing peas both early and late, and they'll be on like a 12-foot trellis. And then in the fall I will plant carrots in this bed, And green beans will go in about mid-May. I'm kind of playing around with the idea of maybe planting asparagus in this bed too. And this will also be the location where I start planting lettuce. You might note that I have these arrows on the bed, and that's because that's the direction I'm going to be planting the lettuce. So each of these shaded areas represents a different staggered planting of the lettuce. And I chose this area because this section of the bed gets shade during the afternoon. So that'll be important to plant the lettuce in that area during the summertime so that they don't start bolting on me. This is my second in-ground bed. This bed is also 5 feet by 28 feet. Now most of this bed will be dedicated to growing broccoli, and I will stagger plant the broccoli like every week or two so that I get that continuous harvest throughout the season. This area also contains where I'm going to be planting potatoes. I haven't quite decided whether I'm going to plant these in ground or in containers yet. These are my long and skinny beds. Each of these beds is about 33 inches wide by 20 feet long. Now I'm going to be doing succession planting of sweet corn in this area. And the first planting of this I'll actually start indoors and then transplant down on May 15th. And as you can see, I put notes in here about when I'm going to start things and how much spacing I'm going to do. I'm also going to be planting pinto beans intermixed with the corn so that the pinto beans can use the corn as a trellis. Over here is where I planted my garlic in the fall. And once I pull that garlic out, I'll put my final planting of sweet corn. Now because I have 3 different varieties of garlic in the bed, I also make notes about the order I put those garlic in. So like the back row is chestnut red, and I got music, and then I got the matachi. This area is where I got my tomatoes, some peppers, and my onions. So in the back row is my indeterminate tomatoes. So my San Marzanos, my Amish paste. As those get taller, and yet I have like a 4-foot spacing between this bed and the bed with the corn and the garlic in it. That way the shadow that's cast by the tomatoes doesn't shade out those other plants behind it. Here I got summer pick along with my shishito and jalapenos. And then my onions we're going here. So one bed will have the candy onions, the other bed will have the Patterson onions. The new section I'm adding this year is what I'm calling potato row. This would be woven ground cover where I'll just lay it on the ground, and I got 10-gallon root pouches I purchased from Amazon that I'll be planting my regular potatoes in. And then in this section I'll be doing some sweet potatoes in 18-gallon buckets. Now my sweet potatoes really haven't done well the last couple years, so I'm going to just do a very small quantity to see if I can't really get the keys for making them grow well down this year. I have one tab where I keep track of my plant varieties, where I'll put like say the name of the pepper and then how many of that pepper I'm going to put in, or in this case here the tomato, what variety and how many of those I'm going to plant, along with just other notes about what varieties I'm going to plant in summer, spring, fall for the lettuce. And in this area here I made notes about what seeds I was ordering and from what location I'm going to order them from. I have one tab set up for my seed starting schedule. Now, I just use this as a guide for when I should start things. The only thing I really pay close attention to in terms of starting on time are the sweet corn, peppers, and tomatoes. Now the tomatoes and the peppers in particular because they have such a long lead time before they get planted in the ground. And speaking of tomatoes and peppers, I always plant extra of those just in case some don't do well or they get damaged. I always then have spares that I can pop in as needed. Well, that's my garden plan for this season, at least as of today. Garden plans are fluid things and they will change and evolve as the season goes on. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of this. Maybe it gave you some ideas for your own garden plan. And we'll see you on the next one.